Wow, just seeing this model takes me back to being a kid. I remember seeing this movie back in 1985, and it transported me to another place. It was the first movie that really encouraged me to want to be a filmmaker when I grew up. I didn't actually do that at first. I went off to a career in flying for the Air Force, but it always lingered in the back of my mind that if I ever got the chance to make movies, I wanted to make them like Back to the Future. So making this model is really special to me. I started building models when I was about 10 years old, and ones like this were a great escape for me. Just like sitting in a movie, I would sit for a model for hours at nighttime, going through the parts, unpacking them from the packages like this, and really just taking my time and looking and see what the model maker was inspired to do. I can clearly see that these time circuits were a point of attention that they really wanted to make sure the detail was there on. That's great. I can't wait to paint that. But there's ones like this that are the time circuits. These time circuits really weren't given a lot of detail, so we'll have to give them some paint and maybe put some real wires on the dashboard to bring the model to life. This looks great. These are the time circuits from the DeLorean. And we can see they've actually put some detail in here on the circuitry and on the actual flux capacitor. So that should be pretty fun to paint and put together. I like to keep my extra excess plastic from the models. You can see that they all come on the spruce like this. And after I'm done cutting them off, I'll make sure that I keep all this excess. And you never know when you might need a piece like this. Maybe you want to build an axle, or you want to build just, some machine guns on the top of a truck. They're really great because you can cut them and shape them, or you can just take a little flame, easy light, or something like this. And real quick, I would take my time and do this a bit more controlled, but just as an example, you heat it up a little bit. That almost looks like a perfect roll bar you could put in the back of a Charger or anything to really have a custom part that you wouldn't have in the model. Just give it more depth. And it's great to be able to do stuff like that with just extra parts that normally get thrown out. Here we have the Mr. Fusion compressor and energy creator that we saw in the movie. It's really nice that it's several different pieces that come to make it up, and the detailing on it looks really great. So this is going to be another fun point when we put together the exterior of the model. So as I said, these instructions are pretty easy, but I still like to take some notes on them. And sometimes I'll even grab some colored pencils like this. And I'll take some colors that I like, typical colors, the blues, the reds, maybe a brown. And then I'll just briefly go through. You can see here I've already kind of sketched this one. Okay, so my parts are all laid out. I've had a good chance to take a look at the instructions, and I have a pretty good idea of how I want to put the model together. Now I'm going to start taking the pieces and actually looking at the instructions and seeing how we're going to build them first. So we've got the dash here. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a decent dash, but there's not a lot of detail in the time circuitry and the gauges and the instrumentation, where I'd really love to see that. So I probably will add a little bit extra in terms of maybe some little red wires, and just really spend some time detailing with a fine paintbrush down the middle the time circuitry, since it's not really a lot of detail itself. But I'm going to put this over here, and then it looks like we're going to move on to the interior seats, which is over here. Now that we've completed painting the parts on the sprues, we're going to go ahead and begin assembling the actual model. We're going to start with the dashboard assembly. Now we're going to be marrying up this interior to the inner chassis of the car, or the lower chassis, I should say. This snap-tight one's not too detailed. A lot of times you'll have exhaust pipes and rear differentials and small type of things that you'll be able to glue on. But this being a snap type model and an easy kit, it's all basically all just one piece. So what I did was I painted it with some different color paints and gave it some washes and kind of dirtied things up to detail it. And interesting thing about the DeLorean, there was only about 6,000 of them actually still around today. There wasn't that many built in the first place. 8,000, I think, something like that. Of course, they had huge plans to be a, John DeLorean, the owner and CEO of the company, had big plans to, make a car company for himself. But they never reached the full potential. I mean, it's such a beautiful car, but it was so underpowered in the engine, and it just had a whole bunch of quirky things wrong with it. There were huge body panel gaps in the car, and the body in particular. It was food-grade stainless steel, so you could actually eat off your DeLorean hood, no problem. So it was very interesting, and no paint, no rust because of the stainless steel. And again, that's part of the reason why the filmmakers chose it as a vehicle, because it was so cool and advanced for its time. It really looked like a spaceship, and it had the exact look of what they were going for, especially with those gull-wing doors. The gull-wing doors looked really cool, but they were a pain in the ass to work with in the film. All throughout the movie, we see it. The DeLorean is come back from time, and it's steaming. The way they captured that on film was by using liquid nitrogen. And when they did, it actually made the gas shocks on the doors so cold that they wouldn't hold the doors up, and they were constantly hitting people on the head. So, while it looked great, it was a giant pain to work with on set. DeLorean was great at marketing at the time. They partnered with American Express, and there's actually 4 gold-plated DeLoreans that exist in the world. That was part of that partnership with the credit card company. Really cool, and what a great, neat idea. It's interesting to think what could have happened to DeLorean. I mean, it had such great fanfare from the movie. Really just the car was so underpowered, it really didn't matter how cool it looked. It was not fun to drive at all. So one final touch before we put the body onto the actual chassis assembly. Tarp head, a bruise. Interior of every little car that we build, I'm going to stamp with a little tarp head stamp. It's a movie from Swiss Cheese Productions that we did back in the day, and it's still in the script form. We never actually filmed it, but it's a little horror movie that we'd love to do someday. So inside of these little cars on this project of mine is just a reminder of that one that I'd love to move on someday. So I picked these up at Home Depot. I used to wear them back in my mechanic days. Just a pair of gloves that go on nice and tight, and you can actually still get your work done. I'm not sure if they're latex. Latex free. They're latex free as well, so if anybody has a latex allergy, they work for you. A lot of the stuff here, you might see the word Swiss Cheese Productions, and it's kind of a fun idea that a friend of mine and I, Gus, came up with when we were working on sets together. It always seemed that something came up when you're making movies that just needed to be thrown together at the last minute. And Swiss Cheese Productions, because the productions were full of holes, was something fun that we came up with. But it's kind of neat the process of filmmaking. And this movie, they didn't originally think of the DeLorean as the time machine. One of the ideas that the filmmakers had was to use a refrigerator. But they ultimately decided against it because they figured kids might be going into their refrigerator. And they didn't want to put that out into the world. The little kids were getting trapped in their refrigerators. They had a few other ideas that they toyed around with as well, but they ultimately decided on the DeLorean. And we're all glad they did, because it is one of the coolest movie props of all time. Sandwiched in the middle, some of the circuitry, and then hoses and cooling tubes and exhaust tubes. Really nice. The detail on this, even though it's a snap tight, is great. I really took my time on these hood circuitry, vacuum tubes that Doc puts in. I think it's Back to the Future 2, when Marty comes in 1955, they go to the Old West, and of course they're broken and busted, and Doc has the instructions that he sent himself from the future, and he fixes them and put them on the hood, and it's just amazing. The level of detail in this movie is one of my all-time favorites. Again, I mentioned there's a few other versions of the model. There's actually a different one of this Back to the Future 3 that has the train trucks instead of the wheels. Of course, the whole reason they had to have the train trucks was because it needed to be pushed to 88 miles an hour because there's no gas in the DeLorean that's stuck in 1885 with Marty and Doc. And of course, gas or petrol, depending on where you live in the world, wouldn't have been invented until the early 1900s, or patented, or discovered, or whatever you want to call it. They had a version of fuel or petrol back in those days, but it was more for heating lamps and that type of stuff. And I think there's even a scene in the movie where Doc tries it, but it explodes the muffler or something. So now we have our wheel, our tire, our whole wheel, which is the tire, the rim, and the hubcap, center hubcap. Okay, and the wheels are on. And there is the first pass completed DeLorean time machine. We'll still do some final touch-up. Final touch-up, I like to put the car on a stand like this. You can get one of these, again, at any hobby shop. Very cheap, about $20. And they're great for, spinning the car around.